Welcome. You are tuned in to Community Chat. My name is Kevin Tacci, and I will be your host for this segment. What do we do with this show? Well, the idea is to better inform you about a lot of things that are going on. It could be community events, it could be new items that are happening in and around the South Shore. It could be local elected officials, even folks from the state level. Joining us today, as he does on a regular basis, is State Senator John Keenan, of course, representing the Norfolk and Plymouth District. Senator?
Perfect. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Welcome
it.
back. How are you?
I'm doing well. No complaints other than the fact that summer's going by too quickly.
Have you had a chance to enjoy it?
Not yet. I always try to enjoy life, but I haven't really had a chance to get away and sit on a beach or anything like that, so we'll see.
Let's talk a little bit about the fiscal 23 budget finally being passed by the conference committee onto the governor's desk and has, I believe, been signed into law.
Yes. It's a big budget, $52.7 billion, covering a wide range of areas. We've been fortunate that our state tax revenues have been a little bit higher than what we thought they were going to be over the last couple of years, so that's good. We've been able to do some really good things with that funding. One, we've been able to increase local aid, which is money that comes back in Chapter 70 for schools. That's now at record amounts. We're fully funding the Student Opportunity Act, which is a great thing. It levels the field for communities. And we've also been able to do historic increases in unrestricted general government aid. And that's money that's used for police and fire, veterans, seniors, libraries, DPWs. It supplements the city's, municipalities funding, city or town funding on those types of programs. And then we've also been able to put money into our rainy day or stabilization account. And that is just so important to get that to a level where if there is a downturn, and some are expecting that there will be at some point, we'll be ready for that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Any concerns amongst your colleagues in regards to inflation rising? We're seeing the cost of everything going up for a bit there. We saw gas peaking around $5. It's kind of receded, but we know it's kind of very cyclical when it comes to those prices.
There is some concern. It's pretty clear that our revenues have peaked, or at least it's clear to me. And I think we're going to see more modest increases in revenues over the next couple of years. And there's a concern that we may see revenues leveling off. But again, I think we're pretty well situated to handle that if it does occur. But there is that concern. It's interesting because there's a dynamic where wages have been rising, and so that's good for withholding taxes and income taxes for the Commonwealth. But at the same time, there has been inflation. And so people aren't really feeling real good about their pocketbooks right now, even though that's resulted in an increase in state revenues. And so we're looking at ways to change this tax structure to better respond to these types of situations.
Do things like tax-free weekends help? I know that was something that was actually passed last year. And we know that we just saw it just this past weekend. How important are little things like that for the taxpayers?
I think they're important, but I think structural change is longer term and more important.
Right.
And so we have some proposals out there. They're included in an economic development bill that we thought was going to move quickly, but has been put on hold, at least for a short while we straighten out the situation about our revenues being so high that there will be a return of tax funds to taxpayers. But in the economic development bill, we do some things for seniors. We increase the senior circuit tax breaker. We help families by increasing the child dependent allowance. We increase the earned income tax credit, which helps the middle class. We address the estate tax issue to make sure that we're more competitive nationally when it comes to estate tax. So there's a lot of good things in that, and we're hopeful that that will advance perhaps over the next couple of months, and if not then certainly early next session.
Interesting enough that you had mentioned about helping those need and watching what's happening when it comes to our economy. Let's talk about things that folks are watching on the news these days. Transportation. I know that you're somebody who, you're the vice chairman for the Joint Committee on Transportation. We're seeing issues with the Orange Line, that being shut down and having a near, luckily nobody was hurt, but they had to shut it down because there was a fire in the train. The Green Line having issues. Your thoughts?
I'm a regular T rider. I've ridden the T my whole life. I like to say I went to high school, college, law school, graduate school, and to work on the MBTA, on the Red Line in particular. There are challenges. We, as a Commonwealth, for many years did not fund the MBTA the way it should have been. The last several years, we have put a lot of money into the MBTA to try to do some catch-up, and it's just not happening fast enough. I think the resources are there. I think we do have to commit some more resources, and I think we have to make sure that we're also investing in things such as safety, making sure that our rails are safe, that the trains are safe. And so we've got a lot of work to do on that. But it seems lately that every time you turn on TV, something's happening, whether a bus went on fire, the fire on the Orange Line where somebody ended up jumping into the river. Just this past week, we had people who had to get off a Green Line train on their way to Fenway Park and walk through the tunnel. We can't have that. We have to have a world-class transportation system here in Boston because we're a world-class city. I was just up in Toronto recently and took advantage of their transportation, made a point to ride their trolley system, their subway system, their bike network. And at first appearance, the Red Line, Green Line, Orange Line, all of them compare pretty favorably. But a place like Toronto just has a much better track record of investing and making sure that the services are safe. And so we've got a long way to go on that.
Does state government, do you look and you talk about being up in Toronto and riding their subway? You look at other major cities like New York City, Washington, D.C., that also have metro systems. Have you looked and done a compare and contrast as to how Boston, Massachusetts does transportation compared to those cities?
Some are better funded by the state. Some are better funded by municipalities. Some have more aggressive fare policies. Some of them are having troubles too. Washington, D.C., even though it's a much more modern system, a newer system, they're having significant problems. Ours is the oldest system in the country, and so some of these problems are expected. But there's some things that they have that it's going to be really difficult for us to replicate. For instance, in New York City, they have the ability to bypass trains that have become disabled, to bypass stations. They've got a multi-track system where they can easily move trains in and out and off and on. We don't have that. The Red Line coming south, for instance, or the Orange Line, or even the Green Line, it's one rail each way. And so that ability to cross things over just doesn't exist, and that makes it challenging. And that's because it's an old system. But I've ridden subway systems all across the country and all across the world. It's one of the things, whenever I travel, I make a point to use their public transportation to compare and contrast. Some are better, some are comparable. I think we've got some work to do.
I will say I like you, I've ridden multiple subway systems. I've done DC, I've done New York, even in France.
Yes.
Rode the metro, although it was a wild ride trying to get from getting off the airport and trying to get to, we were staying at Disney, trying to figure out how to get there, but seeing the signs about pickpockets.
Yes.
in a foreign country is interesting, and being able to compare, my hometown or where I lived compared to somewhere else globally is definitely interesting.
Yeah, one thing I have to say, I think the MBTA does a good job of keeping the cars clean. I think they've come a long way in that, despite how old those cars are. And I think safety on the T in terms of crime compares favorably to a lot of places across the world. There aren't as many issues or concerns about pickpocketing and so forth. Yes, there are incidents, but in general, I think we compare favorably. So in that respect, I think it's a clean, safe system. We've just got to get these new cars online as quickly as possible. The Orange Line's made progress. The Red Line has a ways to go. And then we just have to make sure that we get existing infrastructure to a state of good repair, and then start to think about what's next for the MBTA in terms of changing things, expanding things.
I think it's worth asking, and that is we hear murmurs every now and then about privatizing public transportation, privatizing the MBTA. You think that's something we ever see in our lifetime?
Well, we did see it in commuter rail. So Keolis manages our commuter rail system, and they've done I think a decent job of it. I'm not sure it's the most cost-effective system right now. And the fare collection was an issue, but that's been somewhat addressed with Keolis. I don't know. I think there's real value to having public employees do the work, and I don't think that's the problem with our MBTA system. I've been out to the train yards, to the repair shops, to the garages, and I've seen the work that our workers do, and it's top flight. that they keep those trains running as they do, given that some of them now are 40 and 50 years old.
Sure.
When I sold newspapers at the Wallaston train station as a kid on the Red Line, some of those trains, and I was in 5th grade, some of those trains that were going overhead are still on the line today. That our workers keep them going is absolutely incredible. I think they need support in terms of the safety culture at the MBTA. When they spot something that's a safety concern now, they're encouraged to call an anonymous tip hotline. I think if they see something in a garage that's unsafe on a car, that they should be able to raise their hand without concern about being reprimanded. And when they raise their hand and say, I just noticed something, there's a safety issue with that train, I think the supervisor should come over and say, nice pickup, good job.
Right.
And they should encourage that. Instead, we have this transitional anonymous tip hotline when it comes to safety. And so I think our best work is done on the tracks and in the cars and making sure that they have the appropriate resources and backup that they need, because I think that's a very good workforce. And it gets better every day.
Besides being on transportation, I think you're also on a housing committee.
Yes, I'm the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Housing, and the House Chair is Rep. Jim Arciero, who's been great to work with, and we've been busy this past 2 years of this legislative session with housing.
What are some of the biggest challenges? I mean, housing, I know that the governor, every time he's done the State of the Commonwealth address, he has mentioned that housing stock is paramount. It's one of the biggest problems. What can be done to increase housing stock so that housing is affordable?
We need more. And we need more affordable housing, workforce housing, senior housing, veterans housing, and more market rate housing. We need it across the board. There's some estimates that we need about 300,000 units in pretty short order in order to even just get up to what the demand is presently, and to have enough of an impact where rental rates or home ownership purchase rate prices come down. So there's a desperate need. The challenge is finding the right location for that housing that respects the communities and where they want to zone, and finding that balance, because we desperately need it. And for every senior that we're able to put into nice quality senior housing that's in the community where they want to live, that frees up a house in a neighborhood for a first-time home buyer, for a young family. Every time that we move a veteran into a good, solid veteran housing, same thing, in the area where they want to live, that frees up a home in a neighborhood. And so it's part of it, but so if we build senior veterans, that moves people through.
Domino effect,
Yeah,
basically.
if we build market rate, that moves people through. If we build affordable and workforce, that moves people from one type of housing to the next, and frees it up so that everybody has an opportunity to own or rent reasonably.
But do you need to have buy-in not only from stakeholders in the community, but from state government, from developers? Because there's been too many times that a developer would prefer not to build 40B housing, would prefer not to build affordable, that they want to get market rate for said, buildings or units that they're constructing.
Yes, we have to find, and we have a lot of programs to assist developers in providing workforce and affordable housing. I'm not a big fan of 40B. We've been at this now for 50-something years, and many communities have not reached that 10% threshold. So here's a law that's supposed to promote affordable housing, and there's always attempts to avoid doing 40B. Right. So to me, it doesn't. I don't think it works as well as it could. It has played a role in providing some, but I don't know if it's the best. I don't believe it's the best tool. And so we have to find the proper mix to encourage developers to build affordable, and we do that with a host of other programs. But one of the challenges we face, and I know it's in Abington, it's in Rockland, even it's in Quincy and Braintree, it's in all communities, is the infrastructure sufficient enough to support the type of housing that we need? And some of the communities like Abington, like Rockland, like Holbrook, the infrastructure is really challenged, particularly when it comes to water and sewer. And so you may be able to zone for new housing, you may be able to encourage it with development incentives, but if you don't have the water and the sewer and in place to support that housing, then it's not going to be built. And that's where I think the state has to play an increasing role, making sure that that infrastructure is there, so that when a community and a developer agree that a project is appropriate, that they can build it knowing that the infrastructure can serve that project.
How often has the ongoing drought been a topic of discussion up at the State House? Because it seems like every couple of years we're faced with dry summers.
And I think that's going to happen more. It has not been a huge topic of discussion in terms of the drought itself. Obviously, climate has been a big topic at the State House,
Right.
but the local impacts of climate change, particularly in Eastern Mass right now, are being felt. I know Abington has a phase 4 water ban in place. You can't use outdoor watering. So it's being felt. And it goes back to the issue of housing. Can you really build housing if your reservoirs don't have enough water to supply the existing population? And so we've got to address that. Interestingly, I was at a senior office hours this past week, and a gentleman raised the idea of desalination. And I don't know if it's actually desalination or desalinization, but talked about that. And I have been to a plant over in Israel where I've had water out of the spigot that has come out of the Mediterranean, and it's good water. And maybe we've got to start looking at some of those things, because interestingly, as water levels rise, shorelines are at risk. So there's obviously plenty of water out in our oceans, not enough water in our reservations, lakes, and ponds. So maybe we should start looking at drawing in water, at least for some uses. The infrastructure challenges are significant, but I think it's something we're going to have to start looking at.
So it's easy enough, especially with something that happened here in Abington, neighboring Brockton. Don't forget the late, I want to say the early 90s was the state, through a referendum, told them to ask them, because they use Silver Lake as their primary water source, to find a secondary source. And actually there's something called Aquaria that's built down in Dighton. Problem is that it's used so infrequently. It'll provide 5 million gallons a day when it's up and running, but the city itself probably uses between $15 and $20 million.
Right.
So it's not the primary source. But so neighboring Brockton could possibly be able to give insight on something like that to the other folks in the Commonwealth who are seeking water.
It's always one of the great assets here has been our supply of water. Water is become a commodity throughout the world, and we've always benefited from having good water here and plentiful water. And it's being challenged now. The MWRA system is still solid. They've got plenty of water, but for those communities that are not on the MWRA system, it's a real challenge.
Let's talk sports betting. Governor Baker, I believe, recently signed into law sports betting. There was a lot of discussion. I believe the House had their version and things that they didn't want in their bill. Senate had their version, and I believe via conference committee, late hours a few weeks ago, able to hammer out something. What do you know about this particular law?
It was a little bit of back and forth between the House and Senate. There were disagreements between the effective taxation rates of the proceeds from the betting. There was a disagreement as to the structure of the program that would be put in place. The House wanted to do more independent licenses. The Senate wanted to have fewer. So ultimately what was decided was that the casinos, the existing betting facilities, would be able to have mobile betting systems attached to their license. And then I think there's a provision for 7 additional independent betting applications or licenses that could be used through applications on your phone or your computer that were approved. And then they decided on different rates of whether the bet is placed in person or online. In person at a facility or solely online. And then the other issue was college betting.
Yep.
The Senate did not want to permit betting on Massachusetts college sports. The House did. So the compromise was that you can bet on college sports. If you live in Massachusetts, you cannot bet on Massachusetts college sports unless they're in some sort of playoff or tournament like the Final Four or some sort of bowl game.
Interesting. And any idea as to how much revenue this could conceivably generate for the Commonwealth?
Yeah, so the bottom estimate is $25 million. How high it goes beyond that, whether it makes $50 or $60 million, and then when it reaches that level is uncertain. But that's a pretty significant amount of money. But when you look at a $52 billion budget, it's not a whole lot comparatively. But every bit helps. And this money will go through the channels and support a lot of different programs, much like the money that comes out of casinos does.
And this legislation is standalone, and it's not an amendment to the casino, the gaming one that was passed a few years ago, correct?
Correct. It was a standalone piece of legislation. And I think it's a pretty responsive piece of legislation. One of the concerns I have, and I tried through the amendment process to address this, was to rein in the advertising so that it is not directed in any way at young people. We put in a pretty serious set of restrictions relative to cannabis, but you still see billboards, and I got something in the mail at home the other day about cannabis. The whole neighborhood got it. So, they're advertising. We weren't able to get those types of restrictions on sports betting, and I think we're going to regret that. I'll try again to get those in place, and they weren't incredibly cumbersome or burdensome to the industry, but they were designed specifically to make sure that they're not promoting youth sports or sponsoring tournaments, that their online advertising and their TV advertising, if they do that, is very restricted, that their billboards can't be directed in any way to children, that if they're advertising at sporting events that are most likely where young people are going to be, that it has to be of a certain type of advertising. Those were the objectives, but we're going to keep at that. We're going to keep working on it.
Well, let's talk about it. The fall is here. It's almost near the end of your legislative session, up for re-election. It seems like time flies, doesn't it?
It sure does. I don't know where the summer's gone. I really don't. We're middle of August now, and it almost felt like the other day sweater weather. Incredibly, after that long spell of incredible heat that we had, all of a sudden it was 70s and 60s at night, and you thought about putting a sweater on. So it's coming. Yes, the final days of summer here, it is going by quickly.
Folks want to get involved with your campaign for re-election. Are you back out there knocking on doors and saying, folks, hey, I want to serve you for another 2 years?
Yeah, doing all that. The best thing that I can do as I seek re-election is to keep doing my job. And my job gets me out and about quite a bit. And on top of that, you hit nighttime events and you get out in the neighborhoods and you hit the doors and do those things. But I'm elected to do my job, and that's, I think, is the best campaign that I can do. And even beyond that, doing the work is the way that best helps people. Like our office on constituent services, I think is the best in the Senate. And I don't mean to disparage my colleagues, but I've got a constituent services director, Doreen Bargood, who does an incredible job. And that's just really important. And if we do that right, people appreciate that, and hopefully that translates in re-election. But that's a priority. And if there's a choice between going out and do something that's strictly campaign related or making sure that we're responding to constituents' needs when they call the office, I default to making sure that we are responding to constituent needs when they call us in need of help. And that's a first priority. And then making sure that through our legislative work that we get the resources for our cities and towns, and particularly in my district, the one city, and then the towns, making sure that they get the resources they need. So that's what I try to focus on first and foremost, and then the campaigning follows from that. But just on the job, we just finished our last round of office hours. We do a round through senior centers, then we'll do a round at town hall at night, and then we'll do a round in coffee shops with people, and we do those regularly. And that to me is the type of outreach that is really important to people.
I think I see no harm in taking pride in constituent services and hanging your hat on that, and also taking pride that you're out there and you're amongst the people. People would rather know that someone, if you may not have an answer, but you're at least, someone's picking up the phone, someone's responding, and at least making an attempt to find answers for them, and that's important.
Yeah, I was at Rockland and Abington. We had office hours this past week. And I had a long conversation with the gentleman who came in, and he says, I send you emails. I said, yes. I said, we get back to you. He goes, you do. And he goes, and I appreciate that very much. And he says, usually, I can tell, because I don't know what your process is, but it looks like you read them. I said, yeah, we have a process that comes in. I take a look at it. The staff will kind of do a draft. I'll do a redraft of it, look over, and then we send out the response. I said, so every email gets that type of attention. And then he says, I have a friend of mine who I think has you on speed dial. And I said, how's that go? And he says, you call him back. He says you disagree with him frequently, but you have pretty good conversations. So this gentleman and I spoke for quite a while, and we ended up not agreeing on a lot of things, but we had a really good conversation. And that's lacking today in politics, just the ability to sit down and talk. And so I really enjoy that. And doing an office hours, or if somebody calls the office, I view that as one of the more important things I do to get a sense of what people are thinking.
This is kind of the open question part of our discussion here. Anything that we haven't discussed or talked about, but while you're here, maybe it's top of mind, maybe it's something that just happened or transpired, or that you want to at least make sure you mention while you're here in regards to legislation, office hours, anything that has to do with you being a state senator.
Sure. Well, one, I love being a state senator. I really enjoy the work, and I enjoy very much working for the people of Abington and Braintree and Holbrook, Rockland and Quincy, and perhaps Hanover if the election goes well. So I consider myself very, very fortunate. I love government. I have since I was a kid. It just seems something that I'm drawn to. I can't imagine doing much else at this point in my life, or at any point in my life in the last several years. So it's been an honor to represent folks, and I love the opportunity to keep doing the work. I've got a great group of people that work with me at the State House. They're really committed to the work they do. They do great policy, they do great constituent work, and I hope that that's reflected in what we deliver for the district, and I'd really welcome the opportunity to keep doing that. It's been an honor.
If folks want to reach out to your office, easy way for them to do that.
So if it's government related, a constituent, it's 617-722-1494, or email is john.keenan@masenate.gov. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. And if it's campaign related, then it's keenanforsenate.com is the website, and the email is info@keenanforsenate.com. And so either one of those, but if it's government related, call the office. We take great pride in having somebody always answer the phone, and we'll make sure that we get back and help in any way that we can.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for being our guest once again.
Thank you.
Cheers to you.
Cheers. Thank you.
And we thank you for tuning in to Community Chat. Again, we're here to bring folks in to talk about some of the things that are happening and transpiring, not only here in Abington, but in and around the South Shore to better inform you. Until our next conversation, have yourself a great day.